March 27th, 1814. 100 acres of Alabama forest, wrapped on three sides by a loop of river bent like a horseshoe. By nightfall, more than 800 Creek warriors lay dead inside it, over 8 of every 10 who stood there that morning. The Tallapoosa ran so red, the soldiers firing into it said they could no longer see the water. It is remembered as a battle. It was closer to an execution. Most battles are decided by who is stronger. This one was decided by who was trusted and who was betrayed. Because the warriors who won this fight for Andrew Jackson would be repaid for it, not with peace, with exile and with death. We remember the victory. We forget who paid for it. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a quiet bend in a river became the single deadliest day native peoples ever suffered in 3 centuries of war with European settlers. You'll see why 2 cannons firing for 2 full hours could not crack a wall of logs and mud, and the near-suicidal maneuver that finally did. You'll meet the Cherokee warrior whose name, by tradition, meant the one who tries and fails, and who won the battle in a single morning. And you'll hear the promise made on that field about the sun and the grass that would become the Trail of Tears. This was never a war between civilization and savagery, whatever the victors carved into the record afterward. It was a war over land, and a lesson in what loyalty to an empire is worth. Before we step onto that peninsula, take 1 second and hit subscribe. Now, Horseshoe Bend. To understand the ferocity of what happened, you have to understand the man who ordered it. Andrew Jackson was born in 1767 on the Carolina frontier, and the Revolutionary War took nearly everything from him. He was barely 13 when the fighting swept into the Waxhaws. He saw British dragoons cut down surrendering militia, and helped his mother tend the wounded in a frontier church turned into a hospital. Then the war came for his own family. His oldest brother, Hugh, died of heat stroke after the Battle of Stono Ferry. Andrew and his brother Robert were captured, and when a British officer ordered the boy to clean his boots, Jackson refused, and the officer opened his scalp and his hand with a sword. He carried both scars to his grave. In prison, both brothers caught smallpox. Robert died within days of their release, and their mother, Elizabeth, died of fever soon after in Charleston while nursing American prisoners aboard the British ships. By 14, Andrew Jackson was an orphan, alone, hardened far past his years, and he had already absorbed the frontier's stories of Indian raids on settler cabins, told and retold until they hardened into conviction. He never asked why native nations fought to hold their land. He called them savages and barbarians, and he believed to his bones that they had to be removed from the American South entirely. He did not start the war that was coming, but he was waiting for it. While Jackson built his fortune in Tennessee, a law career and a plantation called the Hermitage near Nashville, the United States pressed relentlessly into Creek land in Georgia and Alabama. The pressure split the Creek Nation in 2. The lower Creeks did the arithmetic of survival, take up American-style farming, accept a centralized national council, prove you are civilized, and perhaps they will let you live. The upper Creeks reached the opposite conclusion, that the council was surrender dressed as government, a tool to take everything, one signature at a time. In 1811, that resentment found a voice. The Shawnee leader Tecumseh crossed the southeast, preaching that every native nation was being devoured one by one, and that only unity could stop it. As the story is told, he warned the doubters that he would stamp his foot and shake their houses to the ground, and that winter the great New Madrid earthquakes rolled up the Mississippi Valley, and the Red Stick prophets called it proof. The assimilated tribes still turned him away. Among the Cherokee, a warrior named Junaluska refused him outright. Remember that name? But among the Upper Creek traditionalists, his words caught like dry grass. A militant faction rose, lit by their own profits and by promises of British and Spanish guns. They painted their war clubs red, and the frontier learned to call them the Red Sticks. By 1813, the argument inside the Creek Nation was no longer an argument. It was a civil war. The American intervention began with an ambush gone wrong at Burnt Corn Creek, where militia tried to seize British powder from the Red Sticks and failed, teaching them that the war had crossed the river. The answer came on August 30th, 1813, at a stockade in Lower Alabama called Fort Mims. Roughly 1,000 Red Sticks, led in part by a warrior of mixed parentage named William Weatherford, called Red Eagle, fell on it, and what began as an assault collapsed into slaughter. Men, women, and children, with as many as 500, killed inside the burning walls. Fort Mims detonated across the frontier. With the regular army locked against the British in the north, Tennessee handed the campaign to Andrew Jackson, and he marched south, burning for it. But that November, his own side proved the Red Sticks' darkest fear true. A band of Hillabee Creeks had just surrendered to Jackson on terms, and before word of that peace could reach home, Tennessee militia struck their towns and killed the people who remained, old men, women, and children who believed that very morning that the war was over for them. It taught the survivors a lesson they carried into the Bend. Surrender bought you nothing. Jackson's march was not the clean advance the legend remembers. His cavalry under General John Coffee burned the Red Stick town of Tallushatchee, and Jackson won a hard fight at Talladega. But his supply lines were a thread, and that winter his army nearly came apart from hunger. His men, citizen soldiers whose enlistments were expiring, threatened to march home. Whole companies came to the edge of mutiny, and Jackson, a man who would not be defied, answered with the harshest discipline the frontier allowed. In March 1814, he had a young militiaman named John Woods court-martialed and executed by firing squad for insubordination, the first such execution of the war. It was a message, and the army heard it. The threats of mutiny went silent. This is the man who arrived at the river, starving, stretched thin, politically desperate, and absolutely unwilling to lose. He could not afford a long siege. He needed a victory, and he needed it fast. Waiting for him inside the loop was a fortress built to make sure he never got one. The man who built it was named Menawa, the great warrior, leader of the most defiant band of Red Sticks. Born around 1765 to a Scottish father and raised in the creek town of Okfuskee, he had made his name on raids into Tennessee and refused to the very end to be assimilated into anything. And he chose his ground like an engineer. He moved his people to a village called Tohopeka, inside a place where the Tallapoosa doubled back on itself so sharply it nearly closed into a circle, a 100-acre peninsula in the shape of a horseshoe. Water on three sides. A single narrow neck of land was the only way in. Roughly 1,000 warriors gathered there, and behind them around 350 women and children. And across that neck, Menawa built a wall, a zigzagging breastwork of logs and packed earth, nearly 400 yards long and 5 to 8 feet high. He set the firing ports so that any soldier charging it would walk into overlapping fire from two directions at once. A frontal assault would not just be costly. For the attackers, it would be a massacre. When Jackson finally saw that wall, even he set his hatred down long enough to admire it, calling the skill in its design really astonishing. Menawa had turned the river into a moat and the neck into a kill zone. He had thought of everything that came by land. He had not thought enough about the water. On the night of March 26th, Jackson camped 6 miles north of the Bend with a coalition that exposed every fault line of the frontier. At its core, roughly 2,000 to 2,600 infantry and militia, including the regulars of the 39th U.S. Infantry under Colonel John Williams, and 2 small cannons, a 6-pounder and a 3-pounder, hauled overland for the work on the wall. On the wings rode General John Coffee, 700 mounted men, and with them the Allied native warriors, around 500 Cherokee, led by names that would echo for 30 years. Major Ridge, John Ross, and the warrior Junaluska, plus about 100 Lower Creeks under William McIntosh. Together, Coffee's flanking force came to roughly 1,300 men. Their orders were simple: cross the river downstream, ring the far bank of the peninsula, and seal it, so that nothing trapped inside could ever get out. On paper, the odds looked like 3 to 1 in Jackson's favor. But the wall made the math a lie. Behind it, 1,000 men could hold off many times their number. Jackson knew it. He never intended to die on that wall. He intended to surround the trap and let it close. At 6:30 on the morning of March 27th, Jackson divided his army. He held the neck himself with the infantry and 2 cannons, and sent Coffee's 1,300 around the far bank, a silent noose drawing tight around the loop. At 10:30, he opened fire. 2 cannons against logs and packed earth, hour after hour. And almost nothing happened. The mud swallowed the iron. Round after round buried itself in the soft barrier and stopped. The wall held. And behind it, the red sticks weren't merely surviving, they were laughing, returning fire, calling out across the smoke, asking for no quarter and offering none. 2 hours. The wall would not break. Jackson could not afford a siege, not with his supply lines and his half-starved, half-mutinous army. He needed that barrier down now, and it would not come down for him. The entire campaign hung on a stalemate, and then it broke, not by Jackson's order, and not by his army. Across the river with Coffee stood the Cherokee, and among them was Junaluska. His name carried a story. By Cherokee tradition, before the war, he had boasted that he would wipe the Creeks out entirely, and when he failed, he reported it to his people in a single phrase: "I tried and could not." So they renamed him the One Who Tries. On this morning, the man named for failure looked across the water at the back of the red stick position, undefended, because every gun inside the loop faced Jackson's wall, and he saw what no one else had moved on. The red sticks' canoes, their entire fleet of escape, moored along the bank inside the bend. He did not ask permission. He gathered a handful of warriors, slipped to the water, and swam across the open Tallapoosa under fire to the enemy's own shore. They cut the canoes loose and ferried them back to the Cherokee line. And now, the back door to the fortress stood open. Colonel Gideon Morgan's Cherokee piled into the stolen canoes, crossed, and landed behind the entire Red Stick Army in the refugee village of Tohopeka. They drove the defenders up from the bank and put the huts to the torch. Manawa's warriors at the wall turned and saw their homes burning behind them, and a large part of the line peeled away to defend their families. For the first time all day, the wall was thinning. Cherokee tradition holds that Junaluska even saved Jackson's life on that field. No record confirms it. What is beyond dispute is that his canoes turned the battle. At the neck, Jackson saw the smoke rise behind the enemy and heard the gunfire erupt in their rear. He understood instantly. The defenders were split. The window was open, and it would not stay open. He ordered the 39th Infantry to fix bayonets and take the wall. They charged across the open neck into the very crossfire Menawa had built to destroy them. The first man over the top was Major Lemuel Montgomery, and he was shot dead on the wall. The Alabama capital, Montgomery, still carries his name. The second man over was a 21-year-old lieutenant named Sam Houston. An arrow drove deep into Houston's thigh. He had a fellow soldier tear it out and kept climbing, taking 2 musket balls in the arm and shoulder before the day was done, wounds so severe the surgeons later set him aside to die. He didn't. He lived to become a governor and the founder of a republic. And he never forgot who watched him bleed on that wall. Andrew Jackson watched. The wall was breached, the Cherokee pressing in from the burning village, the red sticks caught in a closing vise, river behind, bayonets in front. They fought anyway, and the killing went on for some 5 hours, hand to hand, through the smoke of the burning huts. They had asked for no quarter. They received none. What followed was no longer a battle. As the line broke, the surviving warriors went into the water, hoping the river that had failed to protect them might at least carry them away. But Coffey's 1300 had spent the whole morning making sure the river was the one place they could not go. Every bank was lined with rifles. Coffey wrote it down for Jackson without flinching. They tried to cross at every point of the bend, he reported, and not one escaped. Between 200 and 300 were shot in the water. By the time the firing stopped, more than 800 Red Stick warriors were dead. Over 80 out of every 100 who had stood there that morning. It remains the deadliest single day native peoples ever suffered in their long war with the United States. Menawa, the builder of the fortress, took 7 bullets and somehow lived. He lay among the dead until darkness fell, then crawled to a canoe and let the river finally carry him away into the night. The fortress had held against everything that came by land. It died from the water at its back. The horror did not end with the guns. To count the dead, Jackson's soldiers walked the field cutting the noses from the bodies. 1 nose, 1 body, a tally of the slain. Others cut long strips of skin from the corpses and cured them into bridle reins for their horses. The bloodied clothing of the dead was stripped and shipped home as souvenirs. This is documented. It is not the part of the story that usually gets told. It should be, because that same week, Jackson wrote home to his wife, Rachel. The carnage, he told her, was dreadful. In the very same letter, he asked her to kiss their little boy for him, and told her he was bringing the child a warrior's bow and quiver as a gift. Tenderness and desecration in one hand, on one page. The men who did this believed they were carrying civilization to savages. The frontier had a way of stripping that distinction down to nothing. 5 months later, Jackson collected. At Fort Jackson in August 1814, he dictated a treaty. And he dictated it not only to the Red Sticks he had beaten, but to the entire Creek Nation, including the friendly Creeks who had fought for him, some 23 million acres, roughly half of present-day Alabama and part of Georgia. Taken in a single signature, the land of allies seized alongside the land of enemies. Every protest waved away. It was the first draft of a career. When friendly Creek chiefs like Big Warrior protested that their own land was being seized alongside the enemy's, Jackson ignored them. The treaty made no distinction between the Creeks who had fought him and the Creeks who had bled for him. And in a final irony, the one fighter he chose to spare was William Weatherford, the leader of Fort Mims, who walked into camp, surrendered himself, and so impressed Jackson with his nerve that he was let go free. The hero of Horseshoe Bend rode that victory all the way to the White House. And as the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson made the removal of native nations the cornerstone of his administration. In 1830, he signed the Indian Removal Act. When the Cherokee fought him the lawful way and won, securing a Supreme Court ruling that affirmed their sovereignty, Jackson let Georgia ignore the court and take their homes anyway. Which brings us back to a promise. On the field at Horseshoe Bend, Jackson is said to have told the Cherokee who saved his army, "As long as the sun shines and the grass grows, there shall be friendship between us." In 1838, his policy marched some 16,000 Cherokee 1,000 miles west through a brutal winter. Around 4,000 of them died on the way, of cold, of hunger, of disease. They called it the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee had handed Andrew Jackson the victory that built him. He repaid them by destroying the world they lived in. And here is the cruelest turn of all. The pressure of removal split the Cherokee against themselves, the very men who had fought side by side in the loop of the Tallapoosa. John Ross led the faction that refused to leave. But Major Ridge, who had seen American power up close on that battlefield, concluded that resistance was suicide and signed away the eastern lands in the Treaty of New Akota in 1835, believing he was saving his people from worse. His own nation called it treason. And in 1839, in the new territory in the West, Major Ridge, his son John, and his nephew Elias Boudinot were hunted down and killed on a single coordinated day, executed by their own for selling land that was not theirs to sell. The Cherokee Civil War that Jackson's betrayal had set in motion had come full circle. Even Menawa, the Red Stick who built the fortress, did not escape it. He survived 7 bullets at the Bend, only to be driven west himself in the removal of 1836. And Junaluska, the one who tries, lived to see all of it. They took even his land and forced him onto the Trail of Tears, the man who had won Jackson's battle with a dozen swimmers and a fleet of stolen canoes. His wife and his sons died on that march. Looking back on everything, he is remembered to have said the only thing left to say. "If I had known that Jackson would drive us from our homes, I would have killed him that day at the Horseshoe." But here is what the title leaves out. Junaluska was not destroyed. Around 1842, he walked every mile all the way back from Oklahoma to his own mountains in North Carolina. The state that had helped take everything from him granted him citizenship, 337 acres of land, and $100 in belated recognition of the debt. He lived out his days in the hills he had refused to surrender, and he was buried there in 1858. They tried to erase a nation at Horseshoe Bend, and in the long betrayal that followed, they did not succeed. The Cherokee are still here. That is the truth the betrayal could never finish. But the cost was carved into the land and the bloodline, and it is still there too. The river still bends. The grass still grows. The sun still shines. The friendship was the only thing that did not last.